resolve of Georgia's judges to uphold the rule of law and provide equal justice for all is as strong as ever, in spite of the difficulties created by the COVID pandemic for almost 2 years now.
In his State of the Judiciary address, Georgia Supreme Court Justice David Namias offers a reality check on how COVID-19 has affected the already overburdened court system statewide. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on this legislative day 13. I'm Donna Lowry. After the State of the Judiciary address, I went to the Georgia Supreme Court to do a more extensive interview with the Chief Justice. He expanded on why help is so desperately needed in the area of mental health and why Georgia's counties need to give some of the money from the COVID relief funds to their court systems. Also joining us, two lawmakers who are practicing attorneys, and they'll give us their perspectives on how the courts are faring. But first, we head to our Capitol correspondent, Brenda Waters, at the Gold Dome for the news of the day. Hi, Brenda.
Hey, Donna, a big day indeed in the House during a joint legislative session of the Georgia General Assembly. It was the annual State of the Judiciary address. In his first State of the Judiciary address, Chief Justice David Namias focused on challenges in our courts created by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Virtual proceedings are one of the lessons learned from the pandemic that will be used long after it dissipates. We found that for many proceedings with few participants and limited evidentiary disputes, Zoom hearings can be as effective and often far more efficient than traditional proceedings with everyone in a courtroom.
The Chief Justice went on to say that most courts have also moved to using video conferencing for initial appearances and bond hearings in criminal cases, reducing the time, cost, and security risk involved in transporting defendants between detention facilities and courthouses.
Many of these virtual proceedings can and should be part of the judicial system's new normal when COVID becomes just a memory. And looking forward, I also have the hope that the technological lessons that we've been learning can help with long-standing concerns about access to justice by poor and lower-income Georgians who need legal help with issues affecting their families, health, homes, and jobs.
But many judicial proceedings lawfully require everyone be in the courtroom.
They've done so by requiring masks and improving ventilation and sanitation. They've reconfigured courtrooms to socially distance jurors and other participants. Or when the courtrooms just weren't big enough to accommodate jury trials and jury selection, they borrowed or rented larger facilities where possible. We must always remember that court cases are about real people, our fellow Georgians.
Justice Namias says trial courts are still struggling to deal with the backlogs of cases caused by the pandemic, but there is funding available, and it's through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA.
Funding for most courts in Georgia has traditionally been a shared responsibility of the state and the counties. And we need more counties to step up and contribute some of the ARPA funds that they're receiving directly to address the backlogs of cases in their county's courts.
The Chief Justice also addressed his concerns about the growing problem of mental health issues showing up in court.
I want to mention one last pandemic-related issue. Studies have shown that people with mental illnesses are more likely to be incarcerated than hospitalized. Our jails have become our de facto mental institutions, and our criminal justice system has struggled for many years with how to deal with offenders who have unaddressed behavioral health issues. The pandemic has significantly magnified these challenges. Addressing this problem is not just good for our justice system and our economy, it's a moral imperative for our state.
Chief Justice Namias says we are weathering the storm and we will emerge better than we were before. And Senate Bill 370 passed unanimously today. It paves the way for aged-out foster youth. This bipartisan bill, known as the Fostering Success Act, creates tax credits that generate funds for youth who have recently aged out of the foster care system. Without this support, Senator Bill Cowsert says these teens face tough odds.
And what we have found, there are statistics that will just make you want to cry. 70% or more of the females coming out, aging out of foster care, get pregnant as essentially teenagers. A great percentage More than 50% of the kids that are caught up in this sex trafficking came from a foster care environment. 50 to 60% of those children came from foster care. Especially on males, it's mind-boggling. More than 50% of them will be incarcerated within a year of being out of foster care.
As a product of the foster care system, Representative Erica Thomas knows too well the need for SB 370. She entered foster care in her sophomore year in high school. She was only 15 and had already been in 5 different homes.
We have over 14,000 children in the foster care system right now, and no one has to date thought about putting together tax incentives for all of the organizations and all of the caretakers that are doing great work with the foster kids out there. And they need help every single day. You know, we don't pay foster parents enough. We don't pay caseworkers enough, and they need these support systems. So the least we could do is give tax incentives to people that are already doing the work.
SB 370 will now make its way to the House. We know it has her vote. It was Georgia Farm Bureau Day at the Capitol. Outside the Capitol, there was farm equipment and a special rolling classroom that drew a pretty good crowd.
This is the Georgia Ag Experience. It's a 36-foot mobile agriculture classroom. We travel around the state visiting elementary schools and students in grades 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And we're really teaching them about the importance of agriculture, kind of future careers in agriculture, and really understanding why it is our #1 industry in Georgia.
It was also Okefenokee Day at the Capitol. The Okefenokee is the largest black swamp in North America and one of the 7 wonders of the world. So, Donna, if it's Okefenokee with you, that's my Capitol report. Back to you.
It certainly is. Thank you so much, Brenda.
All right.
In his State of the Judiciary address, Georgia Supreme Court Justice David Namias gave Georgia lawmakers an update on how the court system is still struggling with pandemic-related issues. Later at the Georgia Supreme Court, he expanded on those issues in an interview with me. I asked about the backlog of cases, how he wants counties to step up to help local courts, and the justice system's need for critical help in the area of mental health. I started by asking him why he says virtual court proceedings are part of the new normal in the state's court system.
Judges are fairly resistant to technological change. We were kind of forced to learn how to use video conference technology, and it's been used very widely now in all levels of courts for proceedings that don't have a whole lot of participants or a whole lot of evidentiary disputes. Our court, for example, we're in our courtroom now, has used remote oral arguments off and on. We used them for about a year during the beginning of COVID, and then when vaccines rolled around and the situation was better, we went in person. When things got bad again in the fall with Delta, we went remote. We came back in person. And in January, when Omicron hit, we went remote, which allowed me, I had COVID in January, and actually was able to preside over oral arguments from isolation in my house. So it's an example of what we're able to do now. And there are lots of other proceedings. Lawyers love not having to go to a courthouse for a 5-minute calendar call. They can be in their offices, they don't have to fight traffic, park, go through security, wait around, and then get called to talk about the status of their case. And so there are a lot of things like that that are very valuable for the system and that will continue moving forward. The hard part is there are also a lot of things in our system we can't do remotely.
It's made it more efficient, though, in many ways. Do you think maybe you got there a lot faster in terms of technology than you would have otherwise?
As I said, I think we've made more progress in 2 years than we would have in 2 decades without the impetus of having to make change.
Let's talk about innovation in the courtrooms in other ways, other than video conferencing.
Courts and judges across the state have come up with pretty innovative things to try to make the people who have to come to courtrooms safe. And that's a key point we always want to emphasize is, unlike many parts of our society where you can decide for yourself, what level of COVID risk do I want to take? You know, I'm young and healthy, I'm happy going to the grocery store, I'll go to a baseball game. But my 90-year-old mother may not feel comfortable going to a grocery store or a baseball game. The people who come to court usually aren't there by choice. They're either there to get their cases resolved, or they're witnesses who got a subpoena to come, or they're jurors who got summoned, and if they don't show up, they may be held in contempt. So we've been very sensitive to the fact that when we do have to do things in courtrooms, we have to try to make them safe. And so judges have required masks, they've improved ventilation systems, they've done a lot of reconfiguring of courtrooms so everyone's not sitting right on top of each other. Sometimes the jurors sit in the gallery instead of all together in what we used to call the jury box. And sometimes that works, sometimes the courtrooms aren't big enough for that, and so they've had to find other spaces. A big challenge is jury selection. We only need 6 or 12 jurors for actual trials, but a lot of times you have to select those 6 or 12 from 50, or for a big trial, maybe 500. And that's hard to do in almost any of our regular courtrooms. So, we've had judges rent out the James Brown Arena in Augusta, the ice rink at the Columbus Civic Center, the Classic Center that most UGA students are familiar with, because those were big spaces where they could try to do some proceedings with social distancing, other processes to keep people safe. I will say some of those facilities pose their own problems because they don't have the kind of security measures courthouses are designed with, particularly holding cells for defendants. So you may have to come up with some creative ways for security. And they also have some really complicated acoustics. Courtrooms are small in part so everyone can see and hear what's going on. You put 100 jurors in the James Brown Arena, and it can be very hard for people to hear questions and answers. So again, creativity. The Augusta judges bought the kind of wireless headsets you use to do a museum tour, fairly cheap, but effective, and gave them to all the prospective jurors and the litigants, the lawyers, the judge, and everyone could hear what's going on.
I want to talk about backlog now. I liked your analogy comparing it to Braves canceling games and not having to make them up. You don't have that luxury.
We always have new cases coming in, and our system in many places operates at close to 100% capacity in good times. So you have backlog put on top of new cases, and it's like the Braves. 2 years ago, the Braves had 102 games in their season canceled in 2020. They didn't have to replay those. Those were canceled. If they had to replay them, and if they'd had another 102 games canceled in 2021, this season they'd be looking at a 366-game season. All the regular 162 games, plus 2 years of 102 games that didn't get played. And when you think about that, how the system kind of builds up more cases, you really start to understand what a lot of our courts are feeling like they're facing.
Cases keep getting filed in the courts at higher rates, you said, than before the pandemic. And so can you talk a little bit about dealing with the backlog and then these higher rates that are coming in? Because we're seeing the crime rates rise across the country.
We are seeing crime rates rise. It's not uniform across the state, but in places they are significantly up. A lot of those cases are serious violent felonies that tend to go to trial more because of the stakes for everyone involved. We have more gang-related cases which involve multiple defendants. And so all these issues are getting kind of more significant. Those are the incoming cases. And then we have all these cases from the last 2 years that we're still trying to deal with. So it is a challenge.
Yeah, you asked for counties to allocate more money of the American Rescue Plan money. How important is that in helping to improve things?
So we have capacity, and our normal budgets kind of pay for normal capacity. We have to clear out these backlogs. So somewhere we have to build capacity above our normal capacity. Governor Kemp allocated $110 million of the state's American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds, that came from the federal government to the judicial system to help build capacity with temporary facilities and temporary hiring of judges and prosecutors. And that's been very helpful. And we've tried to quickly get applications and start pushing that money out. But that's $110 million for 159 counties. Each county in Georgia gets significant direct federal COVID relief funds. Some of them have allocated some of that money to their court systems, and courts have always been a shared responsibility of the state and the counties. Fulton County is our biggest county, it has our biggest case backlogs, but it allocated $75 million of the Fulton County ARPA money to help its courts clear out backlogs. Now, not every other county has backlogs of that significance, but not every county has allocated any of its money to ARPA to help clear out backlogs. So we have been working with the county leadership and trying to get the word out that counties are going to need to spend some of the money they're getting for COVID relief for one of the most important things any government does, which is run a court system, a place where people can go get their disputes resolved, including these criminal cases that have built up.
You thanked House Speaker David Ralston for the big mental health bill that he is proposing, and looks like it'll go through lots of bipartisan support for that. Talk about what that means within the court system.
Mental health issues, behavioral health issues often lead individuals into the criminal justice system. We have people with substance abuse issues, with mental health issues, and they commit crimes, often nonviolent crimes, end up in court. If we do nothing about their mental illness and behavioral health issues, they serve their time, often for misdemeanor offenses. They go back out and they do it again, and we're back into court. So that's been a huge problem. Our jails are effectively our mental health institutions. We have more mentally ill people in our correctional facilities than we do in our state mental health hospitals. And so we need to do something about that. One thing we can do is use our accountability courts. We have mental health courts, DUI courts, drug courts that focus and provide resources for people, nonviolent generally, who've come into the criminal justice system to try to not just let them shuffle in and out, but rather treat their problems, give them supports so that they'll actually be able to leave and not come back in the system. And the statistics show those courts lower recidivism rates, save a ton of money if you can get somebody back out into the workforce rather than in prison. And if you've ever gone to an accountability court graduation, you really see how these courts save people's souls. I mean, people who have been estranged from their families and their lives were at the end, are now kind of turned back into productive citizens. So that's a good program. It's not nearly enough, and that's why Speaker Ralston and the other folks who are working on this issue, they want to expand mental health, behavioral health treatment and facilities for people before they'd ever get to the criminal justice system. And as we said, judges have been supportive of this for years. We've recognized this as a huge problem. It is great that the Speaker and others are making it a huge priority for the state. And it's not just good for our state and the state's economy and the judicial system. It's a good thing to do morally.
Georgia Supreme Court Justice David Namias. After the break, reactions to his remarks from two lawmakers who are attorneys working in Georgia's court system. You're watching Lawmakers on GPB.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
We are the Southern Environmental Law Center. At SELC, we not only take on the toughest environmental challenges, we win, forcing the removal of more than 250 million tons of toxic coal ash, defeating repeated attempts to bring offshore drilling to our coasts, and securing clean air and water protections for communities across our region. Your most powerful environmental defender is rooted right here in the South.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. We're going to continue talking about the state's judicial system with two lawmakers. Both are practicing attorneys. Joining me are Republican Representative Barry Fleming of Harlem. He is the founding partner of the law firm of Fleming Nelson, LLP in Augusta. And Democratic Representative Josh McLaurin of Sandy Springs. He's general counsel at ExpressJet Airlines. Welcome to Lawmakers. I want to ask you about some of the issues that the Chief Justice talked about. First, do you agree with him when it comes to virtual proceedings, that they can and should be part of the new normal? And what are your experiences? And I'll start with you, Representative McLaurin.
Sure, and thank you, Don. It's great to be on with you. I have very limited personal experience practicing in criminal law, but have done sort of the internship clinical route. So I've seen some cases from the inside of the courtroom. And criminal law in general is a collaborative process, more so than people would imagine, right? It takes prosecution and defense working with the judge to try to figure out how to resolve each case. And so virtual proceedings really empower every single of those participants to get to a more efficient resolution of a case that could be better for everybody. That being said, I really appreciated the Chief Justice's comments today where he recognized that certain constitutional rights that defendants have mean that we have to be extra careful about imposing any virtual proceedings on people who want to assert their normal right to be in a courtroom.
Yeah, do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, it's here to stay. We didn't know if we could do it, and we had to do it, and now we've learned that it can make law more efficient, basically, and less expensive for litigants quite often. So it's here to stay, and as Josh mentioned, the balance now is what we've got to find between the two.
Some were kicking and screaming into it, but they're doing it.
Absolutely, yeah.
He talked about the backlog of cases,
Sure.
and I know you're in the courtrooms all the time. So tell us what it looks like on your end when it comes to backlog cases.
So very few cases go to a full jury trial, whether it be criminal or civil. But the certain amount that do go have been backlogged now for the COVID period that we've been going through. There have been innovative ways to try to resolve cases, more mediations, more judge trials, but the cases that are waiting to be tried are the ones that are going to have a jury. And as the baseball analogy that the Chief Justice gave was very good, it is a problem, and thus the allocation of monies that you've heard, and we're going to have to continue to figure out how to work through that, and it's not going to be easy for the justice system to handle.
Yeah. A lot of people don't understand that whole backlog. They, especially when you've got people who criminals who are in the system, but also their families and victims who want some justice.
Well, there's that saying, justice delayed is justice denied, right? And there are a lot of different perspectives on how to see that phrase. Certainly for families of people charged of crimes. I mean, you have to remember in this country, you are innocent until proven guilty. We don't treat people who, prior to conviction, as being guilty of crimes. And so until that point, I think it's the utmost priority, a moral priority, for the system to recognize that sometimes people languish in jail for years before they get access to a case. And so going back to that idea that people have constitutional rights to protect, the backlog issue is not just an administrative one, it's really a human and a moral one for everybody who's affected.
Yeah, and certainly the Chief Justice recognized that. Let's talk about the other issue, and that's the rising crime rate and how he talked about, we're actually seeing more cases coming in than before the pandemic because of that.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw a crime wave begin during COVID and is continuing. Every time I turn on the media in Atlanta, I hear more and more about little kids being shot or somebody laying in a bed and a bullet coming through the window. So it is a problem, and it has exacerbated the issue we've been discussing with the lack of ability to get into jury trials. Hopefully, with this allocation of new money, hopefully with COVID letting our society get back to normal as it goes down, we hope we'll be able to begin to deal with that. But we only have one choice, and that's to figure out how to do it, and that is what lies ahead of us from now.
Yeah, I want to talk to you specifically about the money he talked about, the American Rescue Plan money, and he talked about the fact that he wants counties to
Right.
start allocating some of that money toward the court system. He mentioned Fulton County and basically said other counties aren't doing it. You used to be a county commissioner with Columbia County.
That's right.
So what are your thoughts on this?
I think Fulton County has a bigger problem than other counties in Georgia, and they stepped up with a good solution, and that is to allocate some of the federal money to help with that backlog. I think our metropolitan areas are probably having bigger issues than some of the rural areas with this. They also have more money, federal money, so I think it's a good example. I know my county is talking about it right now, Columbia County in the suburbs of Augusta. So I think you'll see more counties do it going forward.
Yeah, he mentioned Doherty County and their problems with crime and, you know, having to figure out when you've got 8 defendants and how you're going to be able to handle all the money that is involved with that, but then also social distancing with all of that. I want to get in the other issue that's big at the legislature right now, the whole mental health package that Speaker Ralston is pushing. He talked about that, and Justice Namias talked about the need. He's called the proposed mental health reforms. He says jails are effectively our mental health institutions and corrections facilities are mental health hospitals. Do you agree?
I think this is an incredibly important awareness from a very influential figure in the state, the Chief Justice, that the criminal legal system often ends up being the last stop for problems that could have been addressed much earlier in the development of those problems. There are social determinants of crime that we need to be looking at as a society on the front end, almost like preventative medicine, which is cheaper, right, than treating something that's really difficult to treat on the back end. One piece of nuance that I think we have to keep in mind when we talk about crime during COVID is that the statistics actually diverge depending on which type of crime you're talking about. If it's violent crimes like homicides, aggravated assaults, the kind that are more likely to show up on TV, those did go up in a lot of places and across the state of Georgia. But certain property crimes, this is all FBI crime data released last year, property crimes, other types of crimes actually decreased. So what I think we see with these data and also the backlog phenomenon is the idea that the criminal legal system is really unprepared to deal with some mental health issues that, thank goodness, the Speaker of the House, broad bipartisan coalition of people have set their focus on starting to address this year. But long term, what we really need to do is reevaluate our use of the criminal legal system and see whether it's really, you know, it should not be this option of first resort for dealing with issues that are much more personal and require sustained social intervention and really even medical care.
Yeah, so instead of them going to hospitals, they're ending up in their jails and in our prisons.
We have a long history of this problem in Georgia, and to me it got worse when we closed Georgia Regional Hospital in Milledgeville. I grew up in the Augusta area. When you're a kid, you know, someone would say to you, better not do that, they'll send you to Milledgeville. Activists, probably well-meaning, use the federal court system to force us to close the mental hospital in Milledgeville. And ever since then, you have seen a growing problem. What do we do with the criminally insane, the mental illness that is associated with certain people that get into trouble with the law? And we are constantly trying to figure out a better way to solve that problem. And I give the Speaker a lot of credit. He has a heart for this issue. He's brought forth a package that is bipartisan, and you'll see the legislature enact some things this year which I think are going to begin to help that problem significantly. We've already done some things. This is an acceleration of some of the successes we've already had.
Yeah, because we're talking about substance abuse problems, other things that where they just, the only alternative is to take them down to the jail and then they end up in our prisons. So much to talk about here. Thank you so much for coming on, both of you. I appreciate this. And thank you for joining us tonight on Lawmakers. You can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News using the hashtag GPB Lawmakers. Also, don't forget to tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. on your GPB station for Political Rewind, hosted by Bill Nigut. The legislature is off tomorrow. We'll see you on Thursday for Legislative Day 14. Have a good night.